today's show, everyone. Today we're going to talk about neuroethics, which is all related to neuro law and neuroscience. And we have two wonderful guests today. Representing ethics, we have my dear friend and classmate, Dr. Ludwig Frontier.
Hello, Rebecca.
Hello, Ludwig. And for the neuroscience piece, we have my very good friend, Dr. Killian Kleffner, who people have seen many times here. And we all have a grand time together. Hi, Killian. Thanks for coming back.
Pleasure to be back.
So I know that we are planning to talk about this 1977 case with Harrington out of Iowa. And I was wondering, before I go to Ludwig about this case, if you could tell us a little bit about the neuroscience involved, like the brain fingerprinting and those types of things.
So you have to remember that neuroethics is not about brain neuroprinting only. I mean, neuroethics is a whole field, and even it has two scopes.
You didn't want to let Killian tell us about the neuroscience?
Thank God this program has edition, right? Editor, is he online?
It's not live. No, Brian can edit it. That was just really funny. So, okay, so Killian, you want to tell us about...
Sorry.
No, wait, I have to collect myself now because that was so funny. Okay, Brian's got some great blooper reel footage out of this. So, Killian, can you tell us a little bit about the neuroscience involved in this case? I know they used brain fingerprinting, for example.
Actually, before we go, Rebecca, just start from the beginning.
Yeah.
I was thinking about just leaving it in there, because why not have fun with it? But just start from the top again.
So I think what will actually flow better is if Rebecca does the introduction and then Ludwig introduces neuroethics in general, and then I go into the detail of the neuroscience methods. Does that make sense to you?
I think you are jumping too fast to the case. I mean, the whole point is to talk about neuroethics and neuroscience and how they're related. The case is an example. So your viewer doesn't know what neuroethics is yet. You just arrived. I mean, you want to leave?
All right. I'll start it over.
Down and relax.
We're gonna start all over again.
We'll start. All right, Rebecca, and I'll type go again when we start. All right, here we go.
Today's show is about neuroscience and neuroethics. And my guests today are Dr. Ludwig Frontier, who's a very good friend of mine and classmate who does a lot of work in bioethics. And hi, Ludwig. Thank you for coming.
Hello, Rebecca.
And my other guest is my very good friend, Dr. Killian Kleffner, who has been here many times and does all of our neuroscience work, and he's great at it. Hi, Killian. It's nice to see you again.
Nice to be back.
Thank you for coming. So, Ludwig, will you set the table for us about neuroethics in general, please?
Thank you. You know, when we talk about ethics, people think about philosophers and theologists, but neuroscience actually came to break that mold. Neuroscience came to bring a bridge and try to understand or explain why we do what we do, and if we are really guilty of doing what we're doing. And neuroscience actually has two scopes. Neuroscience has a scope called A and B. A refers to neurosciences of ethics, and B refers of ethics of neurosciences and neurotechnology. So they are both very applicable, but one will be the ethics for applying neurosciences as a research science, which is a scope B, or scope A about how is ethics plays a role in this dance. So ethics evolving, and when you're talking about neuroethics, we're talking about is someone who we think is bad, for example, bad because he wants to, or does he has a condition, or does he has an imbalance on the brain that makes them being bad? That's an example of how ethics comes here, because then is there an autonomy of them of being bad? Are they willing to be bad? So there's a lot to talk about it, but one of the most important things is scope B, which is neurosciences being applied for improvement of our quality of life and the improvement of their science outreach. So that's why neurosciences has two branches: fundamental neuroethics and the applied neuroethics, and which is A and B. So that's very interesting, and I'm very happy to talk about neuroethics with you today.
Wait, thank you, Ludwig. Okay, let's let Killian talk a little bit about neuroscience and anything that he wants to add to your very nice place setting there of neuroethics. So, Killian, over to you. Bring us some science.
Yeah, so the most fun thing about neuroscience is figuring out what we can measure and what we can figure out about human behavior in particular, right? So we've made a lot of progress, a lot of strides in the last few decades of understanding what is going on in the brain, how the brain connects to the rest of the body to bring about behavior, decision-making, moods, all sorts of things, right? So that's the beauty of neuroscience, is that it can tell you a lot about what underlying things are going on that results in the behavior or the mood, whatever outcome you're looking at, right? That is applied to many different fields, and the field that we're talking about right now is neuroethics, right? So the neuroscience side that I'm used to is that can we measure it? And the neuroethics side of it is, should we use that information? Is it right to use that information? Is it accurate to use that information?
And so, Killian, what do you think? Like, I know that we are all planning at some point here to talk about this Harrington case out of Iowa from way back in the day in 1977, but they use things like brain fingerprinting, which I'm not really sure what that is. But what do you think about, what the standard is for should we use this information and when should we use this information?
For me, it has to be based on a certainty principle, right? So if you are using neuroscience and you have a result from a brain image or a CAT scan or some other, measurement of the human brain, how certain can you be that that is representing what you think it should and not something else, right? So if you have a high degree of certainty in neuroscience, I think it can be very useful and applied in useful ways to things like neuroethics.
Ludwig, what do you think?
Yes, actually, I wanted to jump in because you pointed brain fingerprinting. And a brain fingerprinting is a technology that indicates when someone has a genuine memory of an event. So there is a case from 2003, is Harrington versus the state of Iowa, sorry, when in 1977, a 56-year-old retired police captain worked as a security guard at a car dealership in Iowa. He was murdered. And in 78, 1 year after, there was this guy called Terry Harrington. He was convicted on first-degree murder of this incident. Harrington was 17 years old when he was charged, but he was charged based on testimonies of people that were there. It was 25 years later, in April 2003, the Iowa Supreme Court released Terry Harrington after his lawyer brought novel brain fingerprinting technique admitted in court. So what is this brain fingerprinting? It indicated that Harrington did not remember or know, or he didn't have memory of any crucial details of the crime that he was convicted for. His brain fingerprinting showed a 99.9% statistical confidence level. And even worse, the record were not stored in Harrington's brain, but neurosciences showed that the brain fingerprinting matched his alibi. And then it was when these testimonies, or these people who made these testimonies, were confronted and they admitted that they were not completely true. So we're talking about a case of someone who lost 25 of his most productive years. And it was neuroscience admitted in court that finally could bring a light. Something important about this case is it was not the brain fingerprinting itself, but brain fingerprinting brought the proof so that this testimony could be clear out. So it was the same people that have said that might have seen him or might have incriminated him there was the same people who then were confronted and had to admit they said things that they were told to say, but it was not really a testimony. So, and I think that's the beauty of this case as neuroethics, when you come and you say then, well, should we be doing brain fingerprinting in every case? Should that be mandatory? How can I use this? And that's that's the burden of neuroethics. I think we need to speak more about neuroethics in terms of neurosciences so we can develop it better, create better confidence, and we don't have to wait 25 years to know that tools like this exist and could save a potential productive life.
I think it's a very interesting topic. I think neuroethics is very often not discussed, which is one of the reasons that I think this is an important conversation for us to have and for people to think about. Killian, how does one do brain fingerprinting? Like, can you enlighten me a little bit about brain fingerprinting in general? I know Ludwig laid it out, but just from the science perspective.
Yeah, so the great thing about the brain fingerprinting is that it's one of the neuroscience tests that has a high degree of certainty. So when you do the test and you get a result, you can trust it, right? So that's really important. Once you get the results, it's not going to be due to some other explanation. If you get a positive result, meaning they hold the memories like Ludwig's talking about, that's accurate. And if you get a report that they don't, that's accurate. It doesn't say whether they're guilty or not, but it will accurately say whether they remember or don't remember whatever they're being shown. Now, the reason it's so accurate is because it's actually a really rigorous test. So for this one, what they do, they don't put you in a big machine. They put some electrodes on your head that measure your brain activity, and they show images to the person. They show hundreds of images to the person. And some of those images will be completely random things, like maybe an orange, assuming oranges had nothing to do with the crime. Some of them will be things related to the crime, but maybe that everybody knows about. Maybe it was in the news. Maybe it was shown as evidence at a trial. It's well known. But for brain fingerprinting to work, there has to be some small amount of evidence from the crime that would only be known to the perpetrator and the investigators, right? Because then only when a perpetrator sees those images will they know that those are important pieces of evidence from the crime. Someone who wasn't there, someone who didn't investigate it, won't know it from oranges, right? So brain fingerprinting is powerful, but it can only be used in sort of this really specific set of circumstances.
And you know, Keelan, sorry for taking the word. And this is why it is of my opinion that this is great as an exculpatory tool instead of to use it as incriminatory, because there is a very thin line for human rights violations here. You know, you cannot violate people's will or people's privacy that way. You know, there's always, well, in the United States, we have the constitutional right even to say we don't want to say anything, you know, and you cannot use neuroscience to force someone to say or not say something. And this is where neuroscience have a barrier, because a person needs to want to do it first and think. And second, I think as it was used in this case, it was absolutely exculpatory. It was not to incriminate someone, but to understand that that person and his alibi, like what everything he was saying, you know, will match the memory of his brain. But this is a case with happy or sad and independent how you see it. You know, people may have different point of views, but now as the question goes is, you know, neuroscience goes even more deeper than that. Like, what will happen to this person after 25 years in jail? He was 17 when he went to jail, and he comes out to the world. And will that person come back to society as a normal individual? Or do you think who has responsibility to help him rehabilitate? Because Whose fault is it that he went to jail being an innocent man, as it was proven? Whose fault is it, and who has to pay for that responsibility? Those are very tough questions. But questions goes beyond that when it comes to neuroethics. For example, let's say he was guilty, but he was found that he has some levels of neuroendorphins that would propel him to shoot a gun. Was it his will to shoot it? This is not the case, but these are the questions that neuroethics bring, and this is why it's so interesting because it bypasses absolutism, it bypasses cultural essentialisms, and it just arrives in a moment where every classroom that they are talking about ethics or global bioethics, they're talking about universal set of morals. Remember, Rebecca, we talk about it a lot. Like, is it possible or not to have a universal set of morals? And then you have neuroscience showing you that we are not all the same. So I just want to know your opinion as a neuroscientist about the questions I just proposed. Like, what do you think will be um, uh, the real value of a neuroethicist in a courtroom? Do you think, do you agree with me that this should be actually exculpatory, not incrimination, not for incrimination of an individual?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So again, fingerprinting is a great example of a test that has high certainty. But I completely agree with you, Ludwig, that if it's used as it can be abused to make someone seem more incriminating than they are, right? So let's say there's an orange shirt involved in the crime somehow. I don't know how, but let's say orange shirt is a piece of evidence from the crime. Maybe at some point during questioning, the detective said, "What about that orange shirt? Tell us more about that orange shirt." They mention it a lot, right? And then during the brain fingerprinting, sure enough, an orange shirt comes up, and that person will say, well, their brain will say, "Orange shirt. That's something I heard a lot about. I heard a lot about that orange shirt," right? So it can be made to look incriminating because, in fact, they were exposed to that evidence beforehand, right? So that's why I say it's really crucial that there has to be a certain set of evidence that has never been exposed to anybody except the perpetrator and the investigators, right? You mentioned another example, which was the level of neuroendorphins in the brain. That would be an example of a really low certainty neuroscience test, right? The reason for different levels of neuroendorphins in a brain, and different compared to who? Different compared to that person at a different time, different compared to that person and other people. There's so much variation that it's a very low certainty type of neuroscience test that I feel should not be used for any neurolegal decision making.
Yeah, and that's why when I went for bypassing absolutism or bypassing any type of manipulation, because what can happen with neuroethics is that in the wrong hands could be even dangerous. I mean, even brain fingerprinting needs that amount of specificity and professionalism about the evaluator as well. So an evaluator can really come with mixed results and incriminate someone who is innocent because of his own personal interest. And that creates a very complex relationship between bioethics and ethics as a regular science. And and that's where it comes. We're talking about how it varies within the individual and between individuals, even levels. But hey, if you have someone you really love going to jail, believe me, you're gonna try to look for whatever chance to disincriminate that person. And if it will be saying, oh, he didn't want to kill you, he just had this personality disorder and I made him kill you, that will be the exit. They're going to use it. And how then neuro law, which is the other topic,
Mm-hmm.
that is like, how am I going to apply neurosciences to law and justice. And justice is actually one of the principle of the principalist ethics. So how am I going to bring neuro law into the neuroethics complex world? Do you have an idea as a neuroscientist?
There has to be agreement in the field, and it has to be done with lawyers. The agreement has to be with lawyers, with neuroscientists, with ethics professionals, everybody together to evaluate what types of neuroscience can be legitimately used in these scenarios, how much they can be trusted, whether it's appropriate to apply them in an exculpatory way or not, and sort of when you draw the line of professionalism and when you can say, yes, I am an expert in neuroscience, but I will not speak to this particular test because it was not applied in an ethical way, right? So there has to be some sort of standards in place, which we currently don't have very good standards in place that are agreed upon across all of these fields.
And this is, sorry, Rebecca, to interrupt you. I just wanted to say at last, just to compliment, because I completely agree with you. This is why we need to talk more about this, because the more we use it, the more standardized we have it. So, Rebecca, were you going to say something? I apologize, I interrupted you.
What I was going to say is that I think that there's also a problem, related to, as Killian was pointing out, professional standards. So I know that there was a case in California back in 2012 where a neurosurgeon put botulism into the brain of 6 different patients that had cancer. He had gotten permission from the Institutional Review Board to do one, but he decided to do all 6 of them, and every patient died. He lost his job in California, but he currently is working in another state. And this was really appalling to me because it violates so many ethical things, including, medical ethics, which is not necessarily our topic here, because we're talking about, neuroscience. So I just wanted to kind of jump into this discussion and say, yes, that what you are talking about, what you were both talking about is correct. We need to not only have these principles in place, but we also need to make sure that as professional people, we're abiding by these standards as well.
So about sadly, I don't know the case, but I'm gonna take it as an example, and we have to remember that there are so many areas that we need to know first. Did the patient know about the procedure? They have an informed consent about it? Was he willing to harm them genuinely? And that will not change the outcome as much. But as I said before, in postmodernism society or post-industrial society, however you want to call it, absolutism has no place.
I'll send you the case later. So basically, he went to the Institutional Review Board for one patient and then just did 6. So that was the issue. The Institutional Review Board said, yes, you can in this one case. And he, without going to the institute, without any ethical oversight at all, just went and did it. So I'm sure the patients had some sort of quote unquote informed consent, but how much informed consent can you really give, one as a patient and 2 as a patient with a brain tumor?
And this is the scope B of neuroethics, actually. This is the scope B. I mean, how ethical could that be, this decision, even if he will follow informed consent? How consensual can this patient during these situations be? And utilitarianism will tell you, wait, but these patients probably were very ill anyway, so would they be worth it better doing something for the world? And there are so many opinions that are going to come to this blog or whatever forum we're going to get, that at the end, you use a word called a standard. And a standard can only come because of evidence-based practice. and that's the point that we're doing here with neuro law and neuroethics. If we don't use it more, we are not going to have a standard. We have cases like the one we just talked about, but we don't have a standard of usage that I know of the neuro law in this case, or in anybody. I know about, I've read Australia and other countries are actively working in including neuro law and neuroethics standards in their practices. I read that over the internet, so I don't know how if it's true or not, but we're talking about a postmodern society where patients are no longer from Europe or from Africa; they're from the world, and globalization is in the past. We're already globalized, so we need to talk about social responsibility. How are we serve our society? How are we going to protect everyone so that science is at the service of humankind to improve your outcomes, not to hold you down. And I believe neuro law, which is another topic, have to evolve a lot more because we need to embrace technology, we need to embrace science into our daily life to make it more accurate and make it better. And this is how new areas as neuroethics come into play, and they are born, and you're going to be new words, but probably in the future they'll be like an everyday thing, or I hope.
Killian, what do you think?
Well, when I think about it, for Ludwig's vision to happen, it would take a big leap in our neuroscience techniques and standards, which I am all about. If we can raise our techniques and standards to a level of certainty, and along with it, our ethical standards on par to create the world Ludwig is talking about, I think that would be great. I think it would be a great way to say we have this unbiased test of what this person is saying. Maybe you won't take them on their word for it for whatever reason, but here is this unbiased test in the result. So you can take that into account as well when you're evaluating an alibi or whatever other information you're evaluating, right?
Yes, and it becomes, we will become a more evolved human beings the more we understand about the way we function. And there's anthropology coming here. There's now neuroanthropology too, and the more we understand ourselves better, that should translate in better quality of living, not in the opposite. So, and this is actually the whole goal of even talking about bioethics. Is about talking about how is our life becoming better? How are we evolving as human beings?
Killian, what do you think about how neuroscience is evolving? Because it does seem like every time I turn around, there's some new thing coming out about neuroscience. So do you think this is an ethical evidence-based evolution, or is there something else going on, or maybe it's not evolving and I'm just a crazy outlier?
Well, neuroscience hasn't stopped developing as a field, right? So we're always working to improve our techniques and our measurements. And now we're also working to integrate information from the brain with other areas, right? Now, a big growing field of research is the link between the brain and the gut, right? How those two interact and influence each other in behavior in general, right? Outside of neuroethics. And I don't think that is likely to change. I think you're likely to see neuroscience techniques evolve and improve over time.
I think that's really interesting. The gut and brain connection is probably an entirely different show. But Ludwig, you've been a surgeon for quite some time. What do you think about gut brain and the ethics around that? Because that's a whole nother section of ethics in terms of how people connect the brain and the gut.
I haven't been a surgeon for that. I would never think about that. But you have to remember about phrenology, which is the basics of whole today's brain study. Every single brain, every piece you can divide it into, has a specific function. And from that function, you can then elucidate or expect a response. So if the brain is like the universe of our behavior, then understanding our behavior as not only a construct of a social construct, like a construct of the way we are raised, but also about all the predispositions we carry within when we were made, when we were being in conception, that will help understand human behavior better. And the more advanced we are understanding human behavior, we'll understand cognitive functions too, and we're going to understand better science. And again, I advocate for science and I advocate for human rights, as you know, me the most. So why not we incorporate science into the biggest trials instead of having 2 months of asking questions or making somebody's life in a stress. Let's gonna bring evidence, evidence-based evidence. Let's gonna stop judging if I think or not that you did it or you didn't or you meant to do it. Let's gonna start bringing things that will help elucidate the truth and will help us make a better life and make a better progression of all of us as a society.
I think that's very wise, and I have some more questions for you, but I don't want to be here all night. So I'm going to go back to Killian and ask him for his final thoughts, and then ask you for your final thoughts so we wrap this up so we don't get too far into the weeds for people. Killian?
If it's done carefully and thoughtfully, neuroscience can certainly be leveraged and used in the way that Ludwig is saying. I look forward to seeing that accelerate in the coming years and happen within my lifetime.
Ludwig, any final thoughts you want to share with the folks at home?
Yes, we need to use it more. We need to use it more to know how to use it more carefully. We need to use it more to create a standards. That's a word that happened today a lot. You need to use it more to know how to use it better. While we leave it in the counter, while it's in the drawer, while it's still a hypothetical case that is miraculously saved, it will not go where it has to go. So I really wish anybody who is listening to this start reading about it and gets interested and less going to support science.
I think that's great. We're all about empowered science and communicating science to the curious. And I think this has been a very interesting episode for everybody watching. And I thank you both for coming to the show.
Thank you for having us.
So